On July 1st, 1976, a 23-year-old woman dies in her family's home. Riddled with facial wounds, broken teeth, and weighing only 68 pounds, the official cause of death, as stated in her autopsy report, was malnutrition and dehydration. However, many believed, as did the woman when she was alive, that something more sinister was at play. The facts surrounding this case, extreme religion, bizarre behaviors, an ominous death, and a criminal trial would thrust the world of demonic possession into the spotlight, so much so that many years later, the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose would be based on the real-life ordeal. This is the possession of Annaliese Michel.
Welcome to the first episode of Hosting Evil. I'm Emily.
And I'm Jess, and today I'm excited to share this very well-known case with you, Emily, and you, the listeners. Are you ready?
I think so.
Annalise was born in Bavaria, southeast Germany, on September 21st, 1952, to Anna and Joseph Michel. These guys were devout Catholic couple. I mean, we're going back into Germany, 1970s. Religion was still really at the forefront and the backbone of most families. And then Annalise had three sisters that followed her, but the eldest Michel daughter was Martha. She died at the age of 8 due to complications during a procedure to remove a tumor from her kidney. So this, by default, left Annalise as the eldest sister. So Joseph owned and operated a sawmill, and Anna worked there at the family business. The girls were looked after by their paternal grandmother, who was extremely religious as well. I mean, her three sisters were nuns.
Okay.
And she wanted her son Joseph to become a priest.
Yeah.
So that just shows you right there. So she would often be the one that would educate the girls on faith. Mm-hmm. As a young girl, though, Annalise loved to play the piano and sing, and she could also play the accordion.
Okay.
You know, like most well-rounded young girls do.
I guess the 1970s, right?
Yeah, all about the accordion. And she did really well in school. Her friends said that she was funny and would tell jokes, and she had a bright disposition, but she was the sick kid.
Okay.
She was the one, I think we all had them when we were in elementary school, the sponge that soaked up everything. She was that kid. So by the time she was 5, she already had contracted measles, mumps, and scarlet fever.
Oh my God.
She was dealing with a lot. So this really affected her, and she was held back in school. But by the age of first communion, so maybe around 7 or 8, her health seemed to take a turn for the better. So over the next few years, she was heading in the direction of wanting to become a teacher, as she loved learning, and all seemed to be going pretty well for her at that point. She kind of outgrew the illness, and she was really coming into her own as a young lady. Around the time of her 16th birthday, though, she experienced a fainting episode while she was with her good friend. So this frightened the friend, who just watched her like pass out right in front of her.
Fall in front of her.
Yep. But when Annalise came to, the girls sort of just laughed it off because they didn't really know what else to do with that. I think it was more nervous laughter than anything.
Yeah, and it's not like they didn't have WebMD to go home and Google their symptoms.
Yeah, so they chalked it up to just being, something that happened, but unbeknownst to Annalise, this would mark the time of the beginning of what would be considered, a very dark time for her. So this was the beginning of the end, so to speak. So later that night, after she passed out, so somewhere around midnight, Annalise woke up and couldn't move, like completely paralyzed in bed. She said she could feel an unseen force pinning her down. So it pressed on her stomach and chest, and she could feel the warmth from herself urinating.
Oh my God. So almost like a really bad version of sleep paralysis.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Emily. Yes, so sleep paralysis, which is the temporary inability to move or speak while falling asleep or upon awaking. This is usually seen in those who suffer, though, from narcolepsy or sleep apnea. It can affect anyone, though. I mean, I've had it happen twice in my entire life, and it was twice within the same night. And it is pretty terrifying. But with Annalise, after a few minutes, it was over for her. So it only lasted
Yeah.
a few minutes, but during the time of paralysis, she said it was hard to breathe and her tongue even felt paralyzed because her sister was sleeping in the same
In
room
the
with her.
same room.
Right. And she tried to reach out and yell to her, but couldn't do it. She couldn't even make a noise
Oh my
to let
gosh.
the sister know that this was happening.
And you said she peed herself,
Yeah,
right?
totally peed herself.
Oh no. So she must have been
Yeah, she was
terrified.
terrified. Now, I don't know if the urinating comes from whatever's going on, internally, or
Yeah.
if it was from fear. I don't know. That didn't happen with me, by the way.
Okay, good.
But so she was, she came to, she was able to move again, and she was terrified. But she got up, changed her bed, and the only lingering effect she said afterwards was the soreness in her tongue.
Okay.
And the next day, the mom said, fine, stay home from school. She's tired
Mhm.
from the event. I'm sure she probably did not go back to sleep that night.
Right.
So she moved on from that terrifying episode, and there were no reported incidents until about a year later, so maybe around the age of 17. She experienced yet another blackout during the day, followed by that same ordeal at night.
Oh, so they're connected.
Yes.
Okay. So now we're seeing a pattern.
You're seeing a pattern. It's slowly starting to emerge. So yeah, she's going completely stiff, unable to breathe or cry out for help for a small period of time, and again within minutes, over.
Yeah.
So this time, Annalise's mother took her daughter to see their family physician to see what is
was
going on. And the physician referred Annalise to a neurologist, which is someone who specializes in disorders of the brain, spinal cord, and nervous system.
Mhm.
He ran a number of tests on her to determine the cause for sleep paralysis. Everything came back normal.
Right.
So he kind of chalked it up as an episode of having maybe grand mal seizures because of the symptoms that were correlated with it. But because she hadn't experienced more than two, no prescriptions were given to her at this time.
But that's also crazy because, like, you have to think, I mean, for that family, they've already dealt with
With so
something
much.
terrible. So I can only assume that they're thinking the worst.
Yeah, I think Annalise's mother probably was starting to formulate an idea at this point, but it's one of those things where you don't want to really like put it
Say
out
it.
there and
Yeah.
say it.
Yeah.
Because remember, they're very religious. So I think that had to come into play at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So after this time, her health issues came back. So she had to get her tonsils removed, and at that time she contracted the flu and pneumonia.
Oh.
And her health didn't improve after a certain amount of time, so she was admitted to a clinic in February which specialized in bronchial issues with young people. We don't have those.
Right.
But I guess back then in that time, they would put kids who couldn't recover from these things as a way to isolate them and do full focus on them.
So I guess it would have been like their contemporary version of like tuberculosis wards.
Yeah.
Plus it's, it's not America, right?
No, they did things just a little different.
Yeah.
But while she was at the clinic, it was during this time that she had a lot of time on her hands. So she was able to contemplate really in depth about what she wanted to do with her life. And she was on course at that point to go to university to become a school teacher. But if she didn't pass the exams, she promised Mother God she would become a catechist, which is the teaching using the principles of Christian religion. So that's what the promise she made herself as well as God during that time.
Yeah.
So she went into the clinic in February, and during this time, her roommate reported that she was happy and she had a positive outlook on life. She was thankful for the experience being in the clinic as it gave her time to reflect. But by June, so, quite a few months later, she was still there.
Right. And, away from her family.
Yep,
away
they
from
weren't
her
visiting.
friends.
Yeah, so that's a lot for a young girl at the age of, 16, 17? Yeah, so she was in the clinic still by June, and it was at this time these paralysis episodes struck again. So about a week later, though, after that event, they did some more testing on her, and they didn't see any indication that there was issues, so they sent her home.
Right.
So for her three sisters, this was a long-awaited reunion to have her home because she was gone for so long. But almost immediately upon her return, they noticed that she was different. She had not that bright, cheery disposition. That was all gone. Her demeanor was changed. And they said that it was as if it was replaced by something very dark around her. So during a follow-up visit with her doctor about a month after she returned home, she told him how when she was at the clinic, she started seeing, quote, awful demonic faces and felt as though she were empty inside, soulless.
That's insane.
It's
I
very
mean,
sad.
especially to be like 17 feeling that way,
Mhm.
all of your emotions, and then on top of it, you feel empty.
Yeah. I couldn't even imagine how she must have felt. She also reported to the doctor that she started smelling these horrible stenches, and she referred to it as burning fecal matter.
Oh, God.
And so this paired with these demonic faces was like
Torture.
no wonder why she
Yeah.
had this negativity around her, which it totally accounted for what her family was picking up for her, which was that negative energy swirling around her that wasn't there before.
Hmm.
So she was about to enter into the 11th grade and was feeling nervous about going back to school. She had been gone for so long, hadn't seen her friends,
Hmm.
but was back. And the friends actually reported that when she came back to school, she was withdrawn.
Hmm.
But, and this is interesting, she had this deep desire to often want to discuss religion.
Okay.
So the friends noted, yeah, she could have been religious before. Well, we know she was, but
Right.
now it's what she wanted to be talking about all of the time, even with her friends.
Okay.
So a few months after this, the body stiffness and the blackouts that she was experiencing were becoming more and more frequent. So while she was still experiencing the stenches and the horrible faces during the day, this is going on at night still
Oh
with
my
the
God.
paralysis. So this girl's day and night were just
So she's
torture.
getting like no rest and no reprieve.
Nope, it's just constant.
Mm.
So in the spring of 73, Annalise started hearing knocking sounds in her room. Her hearing was tested and all came back fine.
Hmm.
But then her sisters reported hearing the same knocking sound, which I think is interesting because if you're talking about, well, is this person just sort of being dramatic and making this stuff
Right.
up? When you have people, exterior from that person hearing these
Hmm.
things too, that kind of gives it a little bit of,
Witnesses.
mhm.
Yeah. And that definitely comes up in so
Oh,
many
so many of the
cases.
cases. I think if it's just the one person saying it and no one's seeing it,
Right.
it's kind of harder to take it serious. But no, the sisters noted that the knocking was happening, that they could hear it as well. And then these knocking sounds came from inside her closet, under the floor, and above the ceiling. So places that maybe there aren't anything on the other side that you could
Right.
get to be
Yeah.
causing that knocking. So Annalise confided in her parents that she was still experiencing all of these things, but now she could hear voices telling her that she was damned to
Oh,
go to hell. Yeah.
shit.
Getting real. So her dad, typical dad, chalked this up to the epilepsy and believed that, one day she would be well again, free and clear of all of this. But Anna's mother told him that she personally witnessed their daughter standing in front of the Blessed Mother statue that they had in their home,
Hmm.
where her eyes had turned jet black and her face twisted with hate. So this struck a deep nerve in Annalise's mother, Anna.
Yeah.
So she wasn't going that same route Joseph was going as, oh, this is just epilepsy. She's like, no, I think we're dealing with something a little bit deeper
Yeah.
here.
And moms usually pick up on things better than dad.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. So this was happening in the home, and I'm sure Anna probably felt, a little detached, because this is your daughter, and
yeah.
your spouse isn't seeing or picking up on what you are. So that must have been
Right.
hard as well. Annalise, shortly after this time, was diagnosed with German measles. So again, she's vulnerable, dealing with all, these health
Getting
issues,
sick. Yeah.
and getting sick. And she visited with her new family doctor. And in spite of missing several weeks of school during this time, she actually had to take the Abitur exams, which is an exam in Germany that students take to show that they passed prep school to then go on to university.
Oh,
So she was still
wow.
able to function
Hmm.
in the educational setting, but I'm sure it took every bit of her energy to do that. So it was interesting when she was taking those exams, she was feeling as though she was deserted in the middle of hell. Uh-huh. I
Oh
mean,
my
I feel like that
God.
during testing too, but I feel like with her situation, it probably took on a different meaning. So she recounted that terror that she had while she was taking the exams and experiencing what her body went through when this was happening. And
Yeah.
this was actually depicted in the movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, that they did on her.
Right.
So it was a
Yes.
pretty interesting scene. So after passing the exam to sort of reward her, Joseph thought, oh, a trip to San Damiano would be good for Annalise, as she held this shrine in Italy to such high regard. So, San Damiano is a place of pilgrimage in Italy connected with Rosa Bassini, who was a woman healed by touch. So,
Okay.
this, a lot of religious would go there as a way, like he said, a shrine.
Mhm.
So, they set out and they brought their good friend Thea Hain, who accompanied them there. So when Annalise tried to enter the shrine, she was unable to enter. As she said, it felt like the soles of her feet were on fire, and she was offered water to drink from a well that was known to be miraculous, and she couldn't drink it because she said it smelled bad.
So obviously something's wrong with her.
Yes, things are getting progressively worse for Annalise. So later they were on the bus back from the, heading back from the shrine, and she started taking a violent turn. Even though Thea Hain was there with them, she ripped the rosaries off of her neck and was started screaming, awful, awful things. And everyone on the bus said that her voice got really deep, almost guttural,
Oh, wow.
and it was not that of her own.
Yeah.
Also, that burning fecal matter smell was now emanating off of her, and everyone on the bus smelled
Oh my
it.
God, that's a nightmare.
Just for the record, if I ever smell like burning fecal matter, Emily, please tell me so I can correct that immediately.
We'll have a conversation if we need to.
So, again,
And vice versa.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, I will definitely let you know. So again, it used to stem from her. She would smell it
She smelled it.
and now others are starting to smell that coming off of her.
Yeah, it's emanating off of her.
So at this point, her dad is just like a deer caught in the headlights, holding her, not knowing what to do. And he's probably thinking, maybe my wife was right.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, so can I just say though, so it's kind of like initially whatever was there was around her, and now it's in her.
Yeah, it's starting to come and manifest from within.
Yeah.
And I think that that's how a lot, unfortunately, of these cases start out. It's, exterior, and then it slowly starts to creep up inside.
That's definitely going to become one of our themes.
For sure. So despite all this, Thea and Annalise actually went on to become good friends.
Okay.
Thea thought that maybe she could help Annalise and saw the kind girl that was still there.
Yeah.
And
knew
wanted to
her
help
family.
Yeah, she was good friends with the family. And it was funny because after they became friends, it was reported that Annalise would know the exact moment Thea would be praying for her.
Wow.
So Thea began making note of the time she would pray for Annalise so that she could verify it, and Annalise was always spot on.
That's amazing though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes these folks that are under these possessions will start to have these manifestations happen like this, which we'll talk about a little later.
Yeah.
But during one of Annalise's prayers, she said that Jesus came to her in a vision and told her that a time would come when the whole world would be talking about hell and the devil. And she reported this to Thea, but told her that she was a little confused by it. So Thea said, well, go ask for clarity. And so Annalise went back and was like, yeah, can you give me some clarity? And she said, Jesus was like, exactly how I said it is what I meant. But it was one of those things that she made notes of in her diary and her journals. And they always reflected back on that vision that she had.
But also, like, what a relationship between two young women, Yes.
So the start of university was nearing, but Annalise felt too drained and depressed to study. The medication she was now on to treat the epilepsy didn't seem to be helping. They were just making her more depressed.
If anything, it's probably just like draining all of her energy because it's there to fix something that's not even there.
Yeah, no, she was really, really just completely drained at this point. So Thea suggested contacting Father Habiger. Annalise and her parents met with him to seek his advice, and another priest, Father Roth, sat in on the meeting. So this was the first time, really, the discussion by the Michels of Annalise possibly being possessed was ever discussed in like a formal setting.
Wow. So that's over a year at least that
she's been dealing with this stuff. So the two priests said Annalise appeared normal and did not think she had any signs of possession at this point. So Thea then contacted Father Adolf Rodewick, as he was an expert in the field of possession and had published several books on the topic. So he requested written accounts, And based on those accounts that he received, he did say he saw some evidence, but due to his age, he was almost 80 at this point, he couldn't take it on, but then referred them to Father Herman. So
Okay.
Father Herman saw Annalise a number of times, and every time she was, again, kind, pious, respectful, she still had control over herself at this point. And he said, by all accounts, she was a, quote, nice young lady.
Mm-hmm.
He never saw anything that would lead him to believe that she was possessed. So in the meantime, Father Roth was a friend of Father Ernest Alt, and they had discussed Annalise's case a few times. So Father Alt reported feeling immediately connected to Annalise as he suddenly had the ability to describe her whole family. Like, he never
Wow.
met these people before, but could describe the whole family.
Everything about them.
Yep. He also reported that when he tried to read letters from Annalise or her mother, he couldn't because he was overcome with nausea, but then extreme excitability would follow, and that was witnessed by other people. So he again felt really connected to this case and was experiencing, I don't want to say symptoms, but he definitely was experiencing
Yeah.
manifestations at this time based
Right.
on that.
Which I guess says something about how strong this possession is.
Yeah, when
You
it's
know? I
affecting
mean, that's
priests and fathers.
yeah.
Yeah. So Father Alt finally got a chance to meet Annalise, and by this time she was really gaunt and pale. And during a conversation between the two, her face suddenly changed and her eyes darkened to show no hint of color.
So creepy.
He said she became completely absent, like the essence of her was totally gone. But after he prayed over her, she was normal again. So she went on from that day and began her studies at university, and she majored in education and theology as planned. During this time, though, the demonic phases continued, and Father Alt visited her about twice a week. This is around the time she actually did muster up enough energy to go to a dance, and this is where she met Peter. So Peter was a really nice guy. He found her to be intelligent and friendly and easy to talk to. And this encounter with him jolted her out of this depression she was experiencing. And friends noted that she was now acting like a young lady in love. Leave it to young love to overshadow demonic presence, right?
Yeah.
So while she enjoyed Peter, a few weeks after meeting him, she was like, look, I can't see you anymore. She divulged to him what was going on and all her ailments, but this boy stood by her.
Good. I mean, I guess good for him. That's real love. She's like, I got this monkey on my back, and
he's just like, I'll be there for you.
I got bananas.
So he even accompanied her to her doctor appointments. He tolerated her mood swings.
Wow.
He was just a keeper.
He could probably give some lessons.
Probably could. So Father Alt had guided her to take on a stricter religious lifestyle at this time in the hopes that things would improve. And I think at this time he was saying that he was sort of torn between a supernatural and a natural explanation of her problems. He wasn't completely sold on the possessed train at this point, but he knew there was something going on and was kind of stuck in the middle and was trying to guide her, I guess, as though she were possessed, to see what would happen.
Right.
Giving his best advice. So in her dorm, Annalise and two other girls formed a prayer group and would oftentimes be heard reciting the rosary and praying throughout the day. So the other residents of the dorm found this part of the hall odd, as they hung crucifixes and other religious artifacts all over the hall.
Yeah, that's kind of weird for
college.
I mean, if that was...
I mean, I'm thinking back to my college days. The last thing I wanted to see was
a crucifix. Yeah.
I mean, that's the time you're experimenting, you know, thinking about 1970s. You're talking about like basically sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
That's what college kids are doing, not praying on their knees in the middle of the day.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Annalise is like crucifixes, rosaries, and Hail Marys.
Yes. Yeah. But hey, you know what? To each their own. But, you know, she at this time was experiencing these really rapid mood swings and would oftentimes throw things at the girls and Peter in fits of rage. And she had never displayed any type of behavior like this leading up to this at any point. So they would all pray over her and then she would calm down. So she expressed later that she had no control over herself when this was happening. And she was terrified to be alone.
Yeah.
I'm sure others were terrified to be alone with her.
Right.
It's just like a recipe for disaster at this point. So shortly thereafter, Father Alt visited her and saw her in a state of total despair. And he prayed over her, and he actually did the prayer of exorcism, and she immediately stood up as if to defend herself and rip the rosary he was using to pieces.
Okay. So has he now decided?
I'm thinking he's there. I'm
Okay.
thinking he's like, yeah, this is a problem.
The train has arrived at the
Yes, it has, and he
station.
jumped on board. So so around this time, one of the girls from the prayer group recounted that one time they were all hanging out, and right in the middle of a normal conversation, Annalise's face contorted and twisted into this hideous grin. I think that was in the movie too.
That there was definitely a lot with like her face contorting. And I mean, God bless that actress or whatever, whoever had to do that
Did a good job.
because it comes across.
Yeah, her body became completely stiff. They said it took about 30 minutes for the stiffness to subside, and Peter told the others this was because she was possessed. So he basically just outed her in this moment. Not that I'm sure that they didn't realize something was
Right.
more sinister was going on, but he just was like, yeah, she's possessed. This is just what she does. So Anna agreed. Annalise's mother agreed
Mhm.
that she would probably do better at home.
Yeah.
And I think others were like, get this girl out of here.
Yeah.
So back at home, she started developing new ailments.
Okay.
So her legs would become so stiff that it would make it hard for Annalise to get around the house.
Wow.
So she said it was like she had weights and couldn't bend them and would just sort of have to figure out a way to maneuver around the house. I'm sure that looked really awkward and probably was pretty painful.
And sounds like a nightmare. Like that sounds like something you dream of.
Yes. She said she was constantly in a state of fright, and she could no longer pray at this point either. And I think when you can no longer pray, because that's what gave her relief was prayer.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think when you get to that point, I think that's when things are really starting to unfold here, because prayer is what gives her the most comfort, and she's not able to do that anymore.
Right, because any case of possession, whenever the prayer is being challenged, then you have an issue. But even more so too for her because it was such a part of her life.
Yeah, it was a huge part of her life and had been for a really long time. So Thea sought out help from Father Roth, since at the time Father Alt was far away. So he noted that when he arrived at the house, it was filled with that burning fecal matter smell.
Ugh.
And when he mentioned it, they were like, well, Annalise was just in this room. So that's why it smells like this. Isn't that terrible?
It's terrible that they're just like, they've just come to the point of acceptance with it.
It's crazy. So as he entered the kitchen, Annalise came barreling through the house, lunging toward him, but stopping really abruptly, just like a meter away from him, as there was, and she did this multiple times, but couldn't get past this. It seems like there was like an invisible barrier there between her and the father. And she began screaming and shouting for him to get out. And Annalise's mother told him that before he had arrived, Annalise told her that he was coming, even though he spoke of this to no one.
Oh, wow.
Like he just surprise visit.
Yeah.
Because
so
Thea had
she's got
called.
that ESP or whatever.
Yeah, she's got that prophetic
Yeah.
tendency at this point. So Father Roth tried praying over her, but it did not calm her down at all. So Annalise would soon come under what her family and Peter also described as trances. So it was
Okay.
during this time that the Blessed Mother would come to Annalise to give her clarity on what she was supposed to do. She was told that she was supposed to give penance for the lost souls so that not so many are lost.
Oh.
And Annalise accepted this.
Oh.
So she really took what, the Blessed Mother was saying seriously and really enveloped that and accepted what was to come. So Father Alt at this time, saw this display going on, phoned the bishop, and obtained verbal authorization to perform a small exorcism.
Okay.
So on August 3rd, 1975, it was Father Alt and Father Roth went to the Michel home to begin. So during the small exorcism, Annalise cried that it felt like she was burning from the inside out. There was no improvement at this time. It was just small exorcism. These things sometimes take multiple times. Like you got to start somewhere. And things actually got worse.
Okay.
So at this point, she was only able to sleep about 2 hours per night, and she began performing genuflections, which are brief kneeling and prayer, and then you stand and then repeat, and you do it over and over again. But she would do this for hours on end. And you have to remember, she was had no energy at this point.
Right.
So she's using any little bit of energy she has to do this constant standing, kneeling.
And she was slender, right? Like
She was tiny.
the actress who played her in the movie, like they're pretty close in
Yeah.
size, right? I mean,
Yeah.
she was skinny.
Yeah, and she had lost weight even so by
Yeah.
this point. So Annalise's knees were so swollen and ulcered from all this constant kneeling. And then after she would be done, she would run through the house screaming like a mad woman, frightening her entire
Oh my
family.
God.
And then she would twitch and convulse and then fall. And get this, she would go rigid for several days on end.
That's insane.
So her body would just tense up in rigidity
Yeah.
and not move.
And she would just be like
Wherever she landed,
planked on the floor.
Yep.
Ugh.
It just gives me...
That's terrifying. I mean, even
awful.
just to witness that.
So her family reported even seeing her neck muscles tense up like, quote, bands of steel.
Oh my God.
So by now, as you can imagine, she had a really hard time eating solid food too. She had a hard time swallowing and chewing. And she would have difficulty breathing too at this point. So her mother would try to help when this would happen by placing a pillow under her head, but Annalise would tell her to stop, or she would be forced to undergo something worse. Wow. So it was as if this was her punishment, and cheating her way out of it would cause more suffering.
So no matter what, she couldn't have any relief.
She had to just take it as it came, and she knew this.
Yeah.
And went with it. So anyone that tried to help her, she would just put up a stop.
Wow. So
at this time, bizarre behavior started happening too. So I told you she was not allowed to eat at times.
Like it wasn't already happening.
I know. Yeah. Okay, let me say they're getting worse. The bizarre behaviors are getting worse. Her family, though, would find her eating spiders and flies.
Oh my God. That's...
So she would just be, chowing down on a spider as if it was completely and totally normal. And her poor sisters, could you imagine seeing your sister eating flies and spiders? I would just be like, get me out of here.
I mean, I'm an only child, but that would still freak me out.
So in addition to all this, her violent outbursts became common as her family would learn to get out of the way to avoid being kicked or bitten by her. And it would just happen
out of nowhere. And probably way worse than what her friends experienced when she was back at university.
Absolutely.
Ugh.
So she was destroying religious pictures hanging on the walls and religious artifacts around the house. She ripped apart rosaries, and she broke crucifixes, all things that she once loved and held to high esteem, she was now hell-bent on destroying.
Yeah.
So she, in the heat of day, they found her one time dunking her head in the toilet.
What?
Yep, she did this on more than one occasion. They also found her rolling around in dust from coal, and then she'd run upstairs and just jump into bed.
Oh my God.
Yeah, bizarre behavior that doesn't even make sense. She would also bark like a dog under the table when they were trying to eat dinner.
Oh my God.
This poor family. I can't even imagine.
Terrorized by their own loved one.
Yeah, a girl who once was, the light of their life.
Right.
She was by default the eldest daughter. The sisters looked up to her, and this is, it was probably really traumatizing for them. So small oval wounds also appeared around this time on Annalise's feet and her hands, seemingly overnight.
Okay. So
are you thinking stigmata?
Right. I mean, that's where the brain goes.
That's where the brain goes.
The Catholic brain.
I think the normal, any brain, I think kind of goes there too.
So just for anyone who doesn't know, stigmata is, it comes in various forms, but essentially it's like when sores will appear on the hands or feet and sometimes also on the body. And the idea is that it replicates the injuries that Christ received during the execution.
Yeah, when he was
during
up
the
on the cross.
crucifixion. Yeah. And there's multiple cases of even saints experiencing stigmata. So it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, you see it in both cases with demonic possession as well as cases of those who may be declared a saint later.
Yeah, like miraculous miracles.
Majestic healings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So for her, though, the parents asked her, did you do this to yourself?
Right.
And she's just like, no.
Yeah.
So Annalise also told Peter, though, that her late sister Martha, remember I said her older sister had died, and at this point her grandmother they would come to her to bring her comfort. So her
Oh,
deceased loved ones were rallying around her. At least
yeah.
in her mind, that's what was happening, and that's what she was telling Peter. Father Roderick was then contacted by Thea as Father Alt was away, and he decided to come see Annalise for himself.
Okay.
So he arrived, and Annalise was lying on the floor in a trance-like state, and Father immediately saw this as urgent. So
Mhm.
they were able to get her up off the floor and into the living room, and it was here the first demon announced itself,
The first.
the first of many. So Father asked, who was present,
Mhm.
and the reply was Judas. So Judas is one of the original 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. Judas, you may remember, he betrayed Jesus by outing him to a crowd that had come to arrest him, thus leading to Jesus's death. So that's who the demon said that, it was. And
Mhm.
it was noted that her voice was really low and distorted when this voice came through announcing itself as Judas. Father then determined this was actually a state of possession for sure, hands down. So it was discussed by the powers to be within the bishop and the other fathers, what would happen, what would be the best suited for her. Father Alt was then tasked with being the one to perform the actual exorcism.
Okay.
So on September 24th, she's around the age of 23 here, 1975, at 4 p.m., the first actual attempt at exorcism was performed.
Beyond that small one.
Yeah, the small one was more just the prayer of
Yeah.
exorcism. This encompassed a lot more. So,
Mhm.
in attendance, along with Annalise, obviously, were the two fathers, Father Alt and Father Rentz. Her boyfriend Peter was present. Peter Hain, Thea's husband, was there, and her two
Okay.
sisters, along with the parents. So, an altar was set up by the bedside and religious statues were placed around the room. Before they began, it was reported, though, that Annalise, she was in good spirits. But
Mhm.
when the father sprinkled holy water on her, she began to rage and show hatred. And it's also important to note that these prayers were done in Latin because that'll become
Yes.
important. So, after this initial exorcism, she was howling like a dog at this point. She was cursing, just saying vile, vile things.
Mhm.
But after it was done, it was decided that the attempts would be taped going forward, just so they had something to document while this was occurring because it was getting a little
Crazy.
crazy.
Yeah.
So a few days later, another attempt was made, and this is when Father Renz asked who the demons were that were there. So Judas was the first to come forward again, then Lucifer, and then Nero, who stated he was the third in the covenant. So Lucifer is a fallen angel who defied God and fell from grace.
Mhm.
Nero was the fifth Roman emperor who he was charged with tyranny, and he killed his mother and ultimately committed suicide. So others then came forward after that. So Cain came forward, biblical.
Yes. Cain and
Um, yep,
Abel. Yeah.
Hitler and Fleischmann, who was a fallen priest.
Okay.
So these are all the demons that were noted for that day. From the notes, the message from the demons was one that mocked people who no longer believed in religious sacraments, hell, or the positive effects of prayer.
Okay.
And it was funny too because they would say that the demons would often argue amongst one another during this whole time.
So she's voicing the demons, right? And so she's basically arguing against herself.
Yeah, they were identified as different voices,
Right.
and they would be arguing amongst one another. But it was important to note too that they seemed to be not as powerful when the Blessed Virgin Mary would control them if needed. So
Whoa.
Annalise would make announcements that the Blessed Virgin Mary was present, and then the demons would sort of like, just sort of like fall into line. So Annalise would say that positive entities would come forward to sort of help rally that up.
Manage everyone.
Yep. And another positive force that came forward was Saint Michael, who is the archangel aimed toward renewing religious life.
And he comes up a
Oh,
lot
he
in
comes up a ton,
exorcisms.
a
Yeah.
ton. So during one session, Annalise got up and began choking her good friend Thea who
Ugh.
later stated that even though Annalise at this point was really weak and delicate, she had lost a lot of weight, she had the strength of a bear and it took a few men to get her off.
Yeah.
She actually thought that she was going to strangle her to death.
Yeah. That it'll happen.
Fun times. So let's quickly define exorcism here and what they're doing. So exorcism is the expulsion of demons, which can include fallen angels and souls who have been condemned. So sometimes when a demon states its name, such as Hitler, it doesn't necessarily mean that the entity speaking is actually that of Hitler.
Right.
Demons often lie to confuse or trick people around them. So
Okay.
when we're saying all these demons that are coming forward, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually who's talking.
And if anything, the demons are just projecting evil.
Yeah.
Like as can be understood by, the people witnessing it.
They're trying to throw everyone off.
Right.
So throughout this process, the demons became identifiable by their tone
Mm-hmm.
and in the way that they spoke. So for Lucifer, again, fallen angel, he would often speak in this very majestic and intelligent way and was quick to get to the point. Whereas when Hitler spoke, he barked his words.
How crazy, though.
Could you imagine hearing all of this happen?
Right? Yeah.
So the possessed being able to either speak or understand different languages is also common, and this was no exception for Annalise. So questions were spoken to her in Dutch or Chinese, and she would immediately and accurately respond.
That's insane.
Like if this happened today, I'd be like, oh, she probably learned that on TikTok. I mean, they didn't have these things back then.
Right.
They didn't have internet. You couldn't just
No.
like fudge knowing another language.
There was no Duolingo.
No. She also did not speak Latin, but when one of the attending fathers would speak Latin during the exorcism, Annalise was quick to point out errors he made in his own Latin.
Oh my God.
So she not only she understood
Right.
she understood the Latin as well.
Yeah.
And it's important to note too that demons can speak and understand all languages, because otherwise, how else are they gonna, demonize everyone all over the world if they don't know the languages?
Right.
So this is why this phenomenon that the possessed can understand different languages occurs.
They're like equal opportunity employers.
Oh, their hate doesn't discriminate. They hate everyone. So the demons would refer to Annalise at this time, though, as a snot nose, a sow. They would call her a slut. They would use extremely crude language to describe her when they were speaking to those in the room.
Wow.
And they stated that the reason she was possessed was because she was cursed at birth. So Annalise's mother believes this was by a woman from their village who was poor and jealous of them.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, oftentimes, though, possession, unless the person that's possessed invites that onto them, the school of thought is that they're under some sort of familial curse.
Okay. Yeah, that does come up.
So Annalise actually kept a diary throughout this whole time. And in one excerpt, she wrote that Mother of God would come to her and she delivered a message that she would continue to give Annalise inspiration and that things wouldn't be easy for her.
Mm-hmm.
And when asked how she came to know these things, Annalise says she was just made to have this understanding by Mother of God.
Okay.
So this phenomenon is called interlocutions, which is just that ability to just have all knowing.
Mm-hmm.
So as things unfolded, Annalise noted many, many conversations between herself and positive entities like her Lord and Savior, Mother of God, and they all told her she would suffer, but with suffering comes great reward.
I mean, I guess that's like gratifying to some extent.
I think that's probably why she accepted this as her life.
Her cross to bear.
Mhm. So sometimes the possessed can start to become a mystic too. I think we spoke about this a little earlier, just knowing things that haven't happened yet, almost coined, as being psychic.
Mhm.
So as time went on, the exorcisms became shorter and less eventful. Annalise reported, though, that the demons were still there and she would be tormented as they would argue with one another. So she would be going about her day with them arguing.
Jeez.
Like, I couldn't even imagine. I can't stand like just one person arguing in front of me, let alone multiple demons going at it.
Within you too.
Yeah.
Like within your brain.
So Annalise would begin to feel better at times, but then any attempt at travel would be met with stiffening and rigidity of her body. They really had her on like a short leash.
Yeah.
So the horrible stenches would still emerge and would plague those that were around Annalise. It was hard to be around her at times. But in the spring, Annalise told her family that the upcoming months would take a turn again, but that she would get relief in July. So this was something that they all talked about. Annalise noted it in her diary that July would bring relief. This
Okay.
was a big topic for them. So during Holy Week, Annalise felt drawn to a nearby chapel. Her family took her, and after she was done praying, she attempted to leave but kept falling to her knees, so much so that her knees began to bleed. And it wasn't until the very next day that she was allowed to leave.
Whoa.
So they kept her. They kept
She
her
was
there.
stuck there.
She was stuck there, wasn't able to leave. Annalise would still scream and growl at night and would spend hours in a trance-like state during the day. So she would try to pray, and her family would find her on the floor, her body stiff and contorted. She slept very little and was oftentimes unable to eat still. So she was dropping a lot of weight too at this time.
So, and even though it's sometimes she was able to pray, she was then being punished. That's crazy.
It's like for everything she was able to do, like a consequence came from that. So she was still dealing with all of this, still while trying to write her thesis.
Oh my God.
I was like mind blown that this poor girl was dealing with all of this while, like we always forget, like, yeah, she was still in school.
Yeah, right. I would have dropped out for sure.
And it was interesting too, because during the times where she would get that stiffness, the family would try to move her, and they reported it took multiple people because her body was so heavy, even though at this time she probably weighed like 70 pounds soaking wet. Like I could probably lift her up.
Yeah.
But because of, what she was going through, the stiffness, they said it was like steel.
That's insane.
It took multiple people to be able to move her around. So also during this time, she started hurting herself. So things were escalating still.
Okay.
She would bang her head against walls. She would punch or bite herself. In pictures that were taken of her around this time, which you can see on our social media and on our website, she would be seen with black and blue eyes. Her family also saw her on many occasions be continuously thrown to the ground by some unforeseen force.
Oh my gosh.
So she would just be standing there, and it would just be like,
it would just push her over. That's crazy.
With might.
Right.
But this would go on for hours. This wasn't just like one little time. Like, this would go on for
over
hours.
and over and over again.
And the family would witness this.
I'm sure they needed therapy after.
God, I couldn't imagine. And then all this time that this is going on, Annalise would still be attempting to say the Hail Mary full of grace.
Right. She's doing everything she can.
Everything. So during the exorcisms that happened toward the end, Annalise, unlike before, seemed to be nowhere around.
Okay.
So she was completely absent, whereas before she would still talk and they knew that it was her speaking. She was totally gone at this point and didn't have any reaction to anything that was happening around her. So in May, a friend of Father Alt's, Dr. Roth, wanted to come and witness the events for himself after hearing the tapes. And Father Alt, he entertained the idea of having a doctor on hand because, just a few days before, she was biting at the walls. She chipped her teeth.
Oh my gosh.
She got a broken nose. So he was like, yeah, maybe having a doctor on hand might be a good idea. So when looking over Annalise, though, it was noted Dr. Ross said that she had the stigmata and no physician could cure the devil. That's what the doctor's assessment was. But then later in court, he testified that he never said that. Of course.
Whatever.
So right now it's June.
Okay.
And again, it's still that constant topic of discussion that Annalise claimed that she'd be free from all of this come July. And on June 27th, she spiked a fever of 103 degrees.
Well.
But the next day, she was compelled to make those genuflections again. She would make upwards of 600 of those a day.
Oh my God.
Barely having any energy. Her body already completely battered and torn. She's doing those kneels.
Like 2 of them is hard.
Yeah, it's like a squat.
Yeah.
Which I cannot do.
That's a full squat over
She's doing
and over again.
600, like in constant repetition. So 67 exorcisms later.
Wow.
The last one was on June 30th in 1976. Her parents, her boyfriend Peter, her 2 sisters were present. Father Rentz performed the exorcism prayer, and the last words Annalise spoke to Father Rentz was, "Please, absolution."
Oh. So
Father Rentz agreed, and the family helped Annalise over to a pillow on the floor to perform more genuflections during this time. It's heartbreaking.
It really is.
So after everyone had left, Annalise asked her mother to stay with her. And her last words to her mother were, "Mama, please stay with me. I'm afraid."
Oh,
Isn't that sad?
don't make me cry.
I know. So, but going back to timeline here, so it was just past midnight. So now we're on July 1st.
Oh,
It's
okay.
July. So around 8 a.m. that morning, Anna called her husband, Joseph, to tell him that Annalise had died in her sleep.
Oh my God.
So she technically,
In her sleep.
she was now free
Right.
of all this, just as she had said she would be
Yeah.
all those months ago. It's crazy.
Crazy.
So a post-mortem examination showed an emaciated, still warm Annalise, but they could not issue a death certificate because they could not conclude that the cause of death was by natural causes. So a criminal investigation began, and the media gave extensive coverage over the case. Some of the photographs and tape recordings of Annalise found their way to the media, and attention grew rapidly in Germany.
Of course.
So the case of whether this was possession or not was a huge debate all across Germany in multiple homes. I mean, people were talking about this everywhere. It was a hot topic. And people were actually starting to show up at her grave to pray the rosary.
Wow.
So it was about a year after her death, and the state's attorney office gathered enough evidence, and they actually charged Father Alt and Father Rentz and both of Annalise's parents with negligent homicide.
Oh my gosh.
So the media had a field day with the trial, as it was covered considerably, and portions of the exorcism were broadcast on local German television. On day one of the trial, the courtroom was filled with about 70 reporters and journalists.
That's insane. I mean, for then,
Yes.
that had to be insane.
It was a frenzy.
Yeah.
So Father Alt and Rentz were not supported by the church and felt isolated during this time, of course. But friends and family testified on Annalise, her parents, and the two fathers' behalf. But the prosecution still insisted that if the exorcism had never taken place and she were force-fed, she would still be alive, and the court agreed.
Wow.
So the four that were charged were sentenced to 6 months in prison, but that was suspended to 3 years probation. The two fathers were also fined as well and ordered to pay the court cost. Annalise was buried next to the Michel family home. After her death, Anna, her mother, would be able to look out the window at where her daughter finally laid resting peacefully. The movie Requiem and Annalise, The Exorcist tapes, was released in 2011, and The Exorcism of Emily Rose was released earlier in 2005. Thea would say that she thought the prediction Annalise had back when Jesus came telling her that one day the world would be discussing hell and the devil was the media and all the attention her case would garner from all around the world, including the movies that came from it.
Crazy.
So I was really moved by that movie when I first saw it. I remember when I found out it was based on an actual person, like running and looking up everything I possibly could on her.
Yeah, exactly. So, with that being said, do you think that it was a real case of possession?
You know, when I first started researching the case, I thought maybe this is just a melodramatic teen. I was very, very, very dramatic when I was 16 and 17. But then, you know, I have my little boxes that I check off, and you can't ignore the language component of this. I think anytime someone can miraculously speak and understand another language, especially going back in the 1970s where you didn't have those things at your fingertips,
Right.
I think that speaks volumes. The voice distortion. I know that there's people that can do that, but I don't think a 20-something-year-old girl is going to be able to throw her voice like that without having practice.
That's a big con game.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I do think that she was under evil forces.
Yeah.
I mean, for her to brutalize her body that way and put her family through that, she had no early indication of any mental.
And eating bugs. I mean,
That's
pretty
where you draw
much,
the line.
yeah. Like when you start eating bugs, you know, and you're not like 5 years old doing it for a dare. Yeah.
No, she had a boyfriend. I mean, most girls want to, like, you know, look nice for their boyfriend.
And her poor boyfriend. I hope he
he supported her till the very end.
Yeah.
And he would show up at court too to testify.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, like, it's such a tragic story, but in other ways it's not, almost because of like her beliefs and all the things that she was fighting for.
Well, and we're talking about this how many years later still?
Exactly.
It really lasted, you know, the test of time and had an impression on everyone. So you can't always just focus on the good, I think, in the world. And I
Right.
think when you acknowledge that there's also negative forces there, you can't deny the good then that comes from that. And how can you appreciate the good without seeing
What's
bad
bad,
can do?
what bad can be. Yeah.
Yep.
Crazy. Crazy.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Hosting Evil. For more information on this case and others, you can visit our website at hostingevilpodcast.com.
And don't forget to check us out on social media at Hosting Evil Podcast.
Until next time, I'm Jess. Peace, love, and light.
And I'm Emily. Keep fighting those demons.
Hosting Evil is recorded and produced by Carly Strange at Rockdale Studios.